Hi guys, how are you doing? So I'm spending my evening working on Blood on the River for my ELA, and so I decided I was just going to go ahead and work on the Mississippi Mound Builders, which is the last early civilization that we need to talk about. Um, don't have a whole lot of information for these guys, but I do want to go ahead and give you this little video to kind of give you some information to add to your chart. You guys have already been working on your Aztec chart part, so now I'm going to give you the Mississippian, which are also known as the Mound Builders. They're called the Mighty Mississippians. So we're going to kind of go with that today, and we're going to talk a little bit about them. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom this up for you so you can see it. Again, this is not a PowerPoint that I made because mine are all at school, but it gives us a pretty good rundown of the Mississippi civilization. So just go with me on it if you can, okay? So the Mississippian civilization began around 800, 900. They were in the Mississippi River Valley of what is now the United States. So these guys were located in the United States of America. They weren't located in the Central America area like the other three were. The Mississippians were among the most complex societies ever to exist in the North American continent. So they grew to occupy areas throughout eastern, southeastern, and midwestern North America. And they had close to probably 40,000 people in their civilization. There's no written records left behind. There are some artifacts and some mounds, but other than that, they don't really have a whole lot of records left behind from this civilization. So that's kind of why this one's kind of a shorter video, because we don't have too much to go with on these guys. We do have a lot of agriculture and architecture to talk about with these guys. So let me see if I can click this. Okay, there we go. So agriculture. So they were mainly farmers. You can see that picture right there. That kind of describes them the best. They lived in permanent villages near rivers where they had access to fertile soil. They had water for farming. They grew lots of crops, corn, beans, squash. They kept these crops in a storehouse to provide their villages with constant supply of food, kind of like Blood on the River, for those of you who are reading it. So they did store these in places that they would be able to keep them fresh. They did hunt small animals. They gathered nuts and fruits. They also caught fish and shellfish and ducks and geese and turtles. So they did do a lot of hunting because they had that access. They were able to access that stuff. They did have farming tools they used. They had flint, so they were able to use short-handed hoes, and they were able to make simple sticks for digging. Some even used shoulder blades of elk and bison after they hunted them, and they used those as tools as well. So, yeah. The soil around the area was great for farming, so they did do a lot of farming. They had a lot of fertile soil, of fertile land. Let's see, what else do they talk about? Government. We'll jump into that here in just a minute. I don't want to miss anything. So the Mississippian villages were usually led by a chief. The chief commonly served as the religious leader for the village. So as the Mississippian population grew, the chiefdoms developed, which was a group of villages and surrounding areas that were ruled by a central chief. So they did have a chief. They also had a priest, which was a chief leader as well. They created mounds, which were symbols of power. The cities were the biggest mounds. The city with the biggest mounds, or that had the most mounds, had more power, and therefore they had more influence than the smaller mounds in the smaller cities. So that's kind of where the mound building came into play. That also kind of has a little bit to do with their social structure. Let me see what's next. Keep going. You did see back there, if you read that they didn't have a writing system. They didn't have any stone architecture like Incas and the Mayans and the Aztecs. So, I mean, they used a lot of their farming and a lot of the area that they lived in to survive. Okay, let's go back. Okay, mounds. We just talked about the mounds, how the larger the cities, the larger the mounds, which meant you're more powerful. They built these mounds. They're also known as earthen mounds, and these mounds were usually square or rectangular. And there's a picture right there of like an example of what a mound might look like. You've probably seen some if you've looked at Serpent Mound or things like that in Ohio. And sometimes they were circular. The sides of the mounds were too steep to climb, so the Mississippians, they built ramps. The ramps were usually about 15 to 20 feet wide, and they might had logs on them that laid them down for steps. It was pretty labor extensive, so they really did use a lot of manpower to make these. So they filled baskets with dirt, and they carried the dirt up to the ramp to the top of the mound, one basket at a time. So you can imagine how long and tedious building these would be. And so they just continued to repeat that until they got it at the height that they wanted it. It took a lot of planning and a lot of skill, just pushing dirt around. So, yeah. On the top of the mounds, they typically erected important buildings, like temples or religious buildings. Maybe priests or chiefs' homes stood on the top of the mounds. Sometimes they would have ceremonies that they conducted on the top of the mounds. Archaeologists have studied these mounds for years, and so they have discovered that when structures were built on top of the mounds, they were when the structures were destroyed, the Mississippians built directly on top of the fallen buildings. So as a result, the mounds grew higher, and sometimes they were 10 times the size they originally were. So when a structure fell or a structure was destroyed, they just built right on top of it. So that's kind of what they did. Here's an example of a Mississippian village. You can see you can really lightly see some of the mounds. These are all of the different housing that we'll talk about. Actually, we can talk about that now since you see it. Their housing, they lived in small shelters that they called wattle and daub. And you guys have heard of that before. It's where it was the clay building and it had like the stick roofs. I don't know if they'll show you a picture of that, but they formed these structures because they were easy. They had the materials easy to them from where they lived, and so this is how they built their houses. So they had wattle and daub housing. The Mississippians often constructed a wooden palisade, and you can see it in this picture. There's a wooden palisade, kind of like Blood on the River, for those of you who've read that with me. Kind of like a fortress around their settlement as protection from invaders. These walls had towers that village members would stand on to keep watch, so they had guards. In a battle, several archers would stand on each of those towers as they launched arrows at their attackers. Some large Mississippi settlements built multiple layers of these walls. If enemies got through the first wall, then people inside would retreat and go to the next wall. So it looks like in this picture they have a few. You've got this one here. You've got a few over here too. So again, this is just, they didn't have photos back then. So this is just a illustration of what the Mississippians may have looked like. Mississippians also built moats around some of their settlements for added protection. So moats, to create the moats, the Mississippians dug a ditch around the outside village wall. And then they dug a canal to the nearby river. And so the water would flow into it and fill the ditch with water that was difficult to cross. And so, here's their river. It looks like they might have a few little moats right here, but that just really doesn't have a whole lot of, like, there's some moats over here too, but sometimes they would build like moats around it so that it would keep the enemies away even better. So that's a Cahokia, which is another example of a Mississippian settlement. Not sure where that is. Somewhere in North America, I'm sure. I'd have to look that up. Religion, just like all the other ones, they believed in multiple gods. So most scientists or people that study these guys believe the Mississippians valued order above all. So everything in their belief system and actions put order as their number one priority. So their beliefs made sense with the world around them. They didn't have a written language. So they were intelligent and they were highly observant. They had names for every plant, animal in their environment. They were polytheistic, which means that they believed in more than one god. The Mississippi thought Earth was a flat circle floating on top of a water, like a big island. Interesting. They believed that this island was hanging from the sky by 4 cords in each of the 4 directions, north, south, east, west. And they thought that these directions cut the world into 4 quarters, like a piece of pie. So the Mississippians thought that they lived in the very center where all the directions met. Interesting. So again, that was something that they kind of believed in. This talks about monks, which were some of their priests. They were considered living gods. So again, this is one of their great sun gods that they believed in. Again, polytheistic. Again, I just talked to you about that. We don't need to go over too much more of that. This was the how they believed the 4 corners and things like that. You can pause it and read it if you want to. We did talk about this, agriculture. These are the 3 main things that they did grow because they had access to them and they had fertile soil to do so. So they did grow a lot of maize, which was corn, squash, and beans. The 3 sisters, known as the 3 sisters, if you didn't know that. Some of their tools, they had a lot of flint. A lot of their tools were made from flint. So you can see they had a lot of arrowhead type tools that they created. A lot of bow and arrows and hunting for war, blades and knives. Again, all of this was pretty much made from flint. So they did create weaponry. They did create stone tools, like shovels and things like that, or their version of a shovel. Again, made from flint or stone materials. Some other examples of axes, things that they found, things that researchers and scientists found in their burials. They found some of these tools and weaponry. They did make ceramics. So obviously they did have clay. They were able to, they were highly artistic. So they were able to use clay and dry clay and bone and sand and create textures, which was able to be created into pottery. They were very good craftsmen. They developed a widespread trade network with the crafts that they created. So the Mississippians often traveled long distances by foot or river to trade with other. My husband's laughing and he's really distracting me. I'm so sorry if you're hearing him. Often traveled long distances to trade their beads, their pottery, their tools. Since Mississippians settled by the river, sometimes it was natural that they used the rivers and the creeks and the swamps for travel and trade, and they did that as well. So that's some examples of the ceramics. More ceramics. More different types of ceramics. This one is a double-headed dog teapot. Wouldn't you want that in your kitchen? I mean, seriously, I'd want that in my kitchen. No? Okay, just trying. I thought it was pretty good. In addition, they have different types of pipes, tobacco, and other natural substances they used. So they used clay again to create some of these things too. So again, this was some other stuff that they created. All right, and I think that's pretty much it. This was some of their jewelry. The most common type of jewelry that they had were ear spools or earplugs. And yeah, we see that nowadays, but they definitely don't look like that anymore. They're definitely more modern. The ones that you see in the ears now, the spacers and things, but they had those things back then, but they were made of stone. They were made of clay or copper, shells sometimes. And sometimes they had engraved geometric figures or symbols on them. This would be an example of a earplug. Not so sure how well it worked being of a stone structure, but they did have earplugs. Some more of the earring type jewelry that they had. Wouldn't you want that in your ear? Blech. That just doesn't even look like it feels good. Some of the more of the ear spacers. They had some conch shells that they used for jewelry. So you can see some of the shells and some of the jewelry they used for those. Beads. There are some examples of beads. The end. There you go. I was going to share with you, almost forgot to talk to you about that. And I'm not sure if they actually hit on this at all. What happened to the Mississippians? It never actually told me in the book, but this says that some of the Mississippians, their culture may have demised because of infectious diseases brought back from the Europeans, the white men, which is unfortunately what happened a lot to a lot of the native cultures, early civilizations of the time. Sometimes some believe that their depletion of their natural resources is what caused them to disappear. Violent encounters, war, aka war, they did vanish, and they do have a couple historical sites. One of those being, we were wondering where that was, Illinois. So they do have a couple of historical mound building sites. We do have one in Ohio as well. We have Serpent Mound. So that one's kind of interesting too. All right, and I think that's about it. So that is the Mississippian. That's the best I can do for that one, boys and girls. Make sure that you take this information. You can even use the websites or even research it on your own if you want to add information to your chart. Whenever you get your chart finished, for Incas, Mayas, Aztecs, and the Mississippian, the mound builders, you can submit it anytime you want to. And then we will move on from there. I might throw in a couple activities for you guys. The rest of you won't get any more activities in social studies this week. So your focus for this week in social studies is to work on the charts. Okay. And then next week, we may do a couple little activities here and there with the early civilizations. All right. So I hope you guys are staying safe, work on your charts, and submit them whenever you're finished. So I will talk to you later. If you have any questions, just email me, text me, Google Class me. You got it. I'm always around during the day and the night, obviously. So I will talk to you guys later. Miss you. Do your work. See you later.